Parker, but you can call me BP. Come on and bring the entire family and let's celebrate at the Low Country Juneteenth week. It's a whole week worth of activities, and we're going to spend some time together too. And don't forget about that grand finale that's going on that Sunday, June 19th. On stage that day, Midnight Star, Dave Hollister, Fat Man Scoop, and you've got Shelton Richardson. And of course, the Star 99.7 family, we want to see you there. You can get your tickets by going on to JuneteenthWeekFestival.com. Come on through the Ritz Bar and Grill, 3557 Dorchester Road, and let's get you some tickets to the Low Country Juneteenth Week Festival.
Well, I am back. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be back with another Intimate Conversations with Kenya as a part of the Low Country Juneteenth week. And man, tonight's conversation I'm really excited about because I get to spend some one-on-one time with a woman that I have come to know as a friend and also a colleague in the profession. It is none other than Dr. Shawn Spann Edwards, who is a diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as a human resources and management professional and professor. So I am welcoming at this moment Dr. Shawn Edwards to the stage. Come on in. She's also the CEO and principal consultant of Solutions by Shawn. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
I am doing so well. How you doing?
Awesome. I'm doing great.
I felt like that was a Wendy Williams moment.
You are the host.
Yeah, right. Well, welcome to Intimate Conversations with Kenya, where we are going to just dig in and lean into the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace as a part of Low Country Juneteenth celebration. So why don't we start out? I could have read your bio, and you got some accolades and like a really lengthy bio, but I just, right? I feel like bios are so much better served when you tell people about yourself. So let's tell the people who they are listening to tonight.
So good evening, listeners. I am Dr. Shawn Edwards. I am the proud owner of Solutions by Shawn Edwards. It's a consulting practice focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion within organizations and firms. I also do human resources management and cultural alignment and strategy along the lines of strategic planning. And so I'm very excited to be here. I have an extensive background in management and nonprofit management and leadership and a number of different areas that I have played in because I work, I don't want to work, I want to play. So there are a number of different areas that I've played in. And so I get the wonderful opportunity to enjoy doing this work with my clients. And so whether I'm working with nonprofits and they are exploring board diversity, or I'm working with firms who are looking at wanting to ensure that they have equitable recruitment practices, I serve in all of those different arenas, and I, really want to work with clients who want to make an impact. And so that's where my passion is. That's where my desire lies. I want to leave the world empty. And by doing that, I am sharing, my gifts, my talent, my strengths, and my abilities.
Love it. And you are. You talk about someone who is such a value add to this community. You are definitely that woman. So thank you so much for giving us a little bit about you. And I think you'll learn more about Dr. Edwards as we go along in this conversation. And just like the last conversation, to the audience out there, I just want to invite you guys to engage in this conversation with us. You can submit questions. I will be watching for your questions. So if there's anything that you think of that you want to ask Dr. Edwards, please post it. I will certainly make sure that I do my best to get it into the conversation. So get in, share this live stream with your friends. You can see the live stream whether you're on Facebook or if you're watching on YouTube. Take the link and put it on your social media and invite more people into this conversation. So let's jump in, right?
Right.
So today's conversation is about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging in the spirit of celebrating Juneteenth.
Right.
So I think it's a good place to start by making the connection, right, between what has happened with Juneteenth, the national holiday recognition. Companies are now celebrating Juneteenth inside the
Right.
walls of corporate America for the first
Mhm.
time in other organizations. Share your perspective with us on what this means when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Well, when we think about it, it's a really good question. When we think about it, it's a holiday, right? And so it's a holiday, it's a time to be celebrated. I know that there are some organizations who internally, whether it's through their employee resource groups or just employees coming together through their HR office, they are creating celebrations, internal celebrations. There are some companies who have made this an official holiday as one of their holiday offerings throughout the year. There are other companies who have added this to their floating holiday opportunities. And so, and what I mean by that is there are some organizations who have floating holidays. And so if you celebrate Juneteenth or Ramadan or Good Friday or other holidays where they wouldn't necessarily be closed, you then as an employee have an opportunity to choose 1 or 2 days of the year where you would be able to use a floating holiday so that you can celebrate that particular occasion. And so all of this, coming into an organization, being a part of an organization for a period of time, if you know that it's a part of your benefit. And so folks know that and recognize that. And so when I know that I have an opportunity to be off to celebrate something that I value, I then recognize that my company finds value in me as well. And
Yeah,
then that too creates a sense of belonging.
yeah, yeah. I love that. And especially the point that you made about just some companies really recognizing it as a holiday, whether it's a floating holiday or not, but it's giving
Mm-hmm.
you the opportunity to celebrate what's important to you.
Right.
But one of the things that we always talk about as fellow diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging practitioners, and we hear it a lot, and it's the word performative, right?
Right.
So performative diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. One, can you explain to the audience what that word means when someone says performative? And then share an example or two of what a performative effort would look like.
Sure. So when someone or when an organization or firm is being performative around DE&I, they're really just touching the surface. It may be there may be opportunities for them to like put up a board where they are maybe sharing some thoughts and ideas around a particular holiday or a particular group, but they're not really taking the time to learn and know and understand the needs of that group. And so it just touches the surface. So they'll say, well, we celebrated Black History Month. We had this board that had Martin Luther King and Malcolm X up on it. And so that was, our celebration. Well, did you have any speakers come in? Did you have any training or workshops around Black history? Did you take some time to really understand what's going on with your employees or what's happening in the world? Did you have any dialogues with your employees? When you do that, that deepens the learning and the understanding both for the employees, but also for the organization. And then you move from being performative to transformative. And so when we
Mhm.
think about being transformative, how are we transforming? How are we changing? How are we educating? How are we ensuring that we're creating this sense of inclusion and this sense of belonging within our organizations by helping our employees to learn more and to grow deep?
Yeah,
And that's not to take away from any other group, because I think we can do this where we're learning about each other, taking the time to give folks an opportunity to share with one another, to tell their story. Everybody's story is different. Everybody has one.
yeah,
And so how are we giving our employees an opportunity to really connect and engage with one another beyond the work? Because when we do that, then the work becomes easier. It gets more productive. Folks are closer together and they're able to work better together. And so it's a win-win when we do it right. When we do it wrong, and it's performative, then we have folks who are disgruntled, who are complaining, who are asking you lots of questions, and they're really wanting to see change and make impact. Then they are constantly coming to you and they're saying, why aren't we doing this? What are we doing about that? How, what suppliers are we using? What vendors
Yeah.
are we using? Have we considered this or that? And so really digging into the work of the organization is important, and figuring out how you can weave DE&I throughout the organization.
Two things that came to mind when you were talking. One, when you said learning and understanding, like increasing the learning and understanding of the
Raising
organization.
awareness.
Yeah, it's so valuable to the organization, to the company, right? There's
Yes.
bottom line benefits to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging work. We know that. But I think the sense of idea sharing and being comfortable enough to push back all the things that organizations talk about that breed innovation, initiatives that weave in diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging really do help organizations to do that more effectively, and do it more holistically so that they can increase their momentum into new markets and
Absolutely.
new customer bases. Absolutely.
Right. And I can engage with the customer better because now I've learned more, and the intimidation goes away. That lessens. I feel more comfortable having an exchange with folks. And oftentimes, I know this is Juneteenth, and so we're sort of focused on race from that perspective because Juneteenth is sort of an African American holiday. But at the same time, as we think about those other dimensions of diversity, when we learn more about each other, now I'm able to engage more with women. Now I'm able to engage more with folks who have a sexual orientation that's different from mine. Now I'm able to engage and learn more from folks whose religion is different from mine. And that's internally and externally. And that's where that bottom line value comes in that you're talking about.
Absolutely. The other thing I was thinking about when you talk about performative is budget allocation, right? Like giving dollars. That's sometimes what I hear as a big roadblock is when it comes to the dollar or how much you're investing in some of those efforts as well.
Right. And so you have where you have some organizations where they establish employee resource groups, ERGs, and you have them set up and folks are excited about it. But now they want to do activities, or they want to participate in parades or events, or have a speaker come in, or engage in some sort of program or activity, and there's no funding. There's no funding. Or even worse, you hire a chief diversity officer and they have no budget whatsoever. And they're trying to implement and they're trying to do different things, but they have no money.
Yeah.
What you care about the fund.
Yeah. I was going to say, you want to tell me what's important to you? Show me where you put your money at. That's what's really important to you. Absolutely.
Right. For sure.
Absolutely. So are there any examples? So as we are, because a big part of what the Low Country Juneteenth week is about is education and increasing knowledge. So are there any examples that you can share of what performative, any specific examples? I know you shared one with me before we got started.
And so I got a call today about an organization that large organization, it's a nonprofit, and Juneteenth this year falls on a Sunday. And so as with any other holiday, you usually celebrate it the next day. And so a person that's working with them mentioned that, your schedule is meeting June 20th. That might not be the best day. That's the day that Juneteenth is to be celebrated. And the organization is very upset with the individual that mentioned that, that brought this to their attention. And then they coupled that with, oh, but we care about DE&I. We have lots of DE&I initiatives. What difference does it make if we have this large meeting on the 20th, where you're calling people together, you're calling together employees, volunteers, whomever, and they're all coming together, but this is supposed to be a holiday. Right. We wouldn't do that on Christmas. We wouldn't do that on Thanksgiving. Hopefully we wouldn't do that on a Jewish holiday.
Right.
Are we thinking about Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur? Are we planning big meetings on those days? Likely not, because some of our attendees wouldn't be able to attend. And so just as we think about and consider the other holidays that are now national holidays, we should consider Juneteenth as well. And so you can't say in one breath, we value diversity, equity, and inclusion. We as an organization or we care about this, we value this, we want to make sure it's interwoven throughout what we do. And then in the next breath, but we're going to have this meeting on Juneteenth holiday. So there's a cognitive dissonance happening there because those two things don't match.
Yeah,
Those two things don't match. And so the person that reached out to me was asking, well, what can I do? How can I explain it to them? And I talked to them about performative operations versus transformative DE&I and how they really needed to explain to them. Now it's up to the organization when they have this meeting.
Yeah.
But they also need to know and understand that if they move forward with this meeting on the 20th, what that's saying to their volunteers, to their employees, to their leadership, what it's sending a message. And based on the one thing that they said, it's really not the message that they want to send.
Yeah, it's first of all, whoever that person is, good for that person for having the courage, because sometimes that makes it very tough in the work environment to bring up that concern, or it's not even a concern. It's simply a call out. It is nothing more than a call out. Hey, we probably shouldn't do that.
We should think about this.
Or we should think about that. Like, let's just pause. But even sometimes in these cases, it's difficult and it's not always the easy thing to do. So kudos to that person. And then the second thing I was going to say is, as a practitioner in this space, how often we do have to pause, right? That's what I call those moments, pause to say, well, let's think about the congruency of your messaging around your intent and what you want to do versus the actions that you're currently taking. There's no congruency, and we should talk about that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if we're planning a meal for this meeting, we're thinking about the vegetarian, we're thinking about, all the different diets, and maybe there's pork, maybe there isn't. We're thinking about all of those things. And so we should also consider time, place, and space.
Yeah. That's good. Well, hey, I got another question, but I just want to pause and again invite the audience to ask any questions if you have any. We are going to keep rolling, but we want to hear from you as well.
Absolutely.
And that was a good segue to my next question, because we're talking specifically about Juneteenth, which is an African American holiday, and we know that diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging is so much bigger than just race. But since we're talking about Juneteenth, we're going to talk about race.
Absolutely.
And so I want to know, from your perspective, what role does racial equity and social justice play in the DEIB space?
Sure. There are, they sort of run parallel with one another. And so you can do and really, immerse yourself in DEIB in various organizations and never really get into the social justice piece. Because one piece, I look at it as one piece is education and awareness, and another piece is advocacy. And so there are times when organizations need a lot of education and awareness, and they need to be brought up to speed before any statement is written or any sort of action occurs. They need to understand what it is they're doing and what it is they're committed to. And lots of times I hear from leaders and they're really stirred up about something that's occurred in society, something that's happened in the news, that's running in the media right now, and they want to do something, but they're not exactly sure what. And so you don't want to just run out and do something without educating yourself.
Yeah.
And so, whether that's reading books, looking at podcasts, engaging in conversation, attending trainings or workshops, and really helping you to understand and shape your worldview from this perspective, because it's not one that you've jumped into before. I think then we can get over into the advocacy piece. And so when we talk about social justice, when we're talking about being anti-racist, and we want to be an anti-racist organization, that's a whole nother level of training and understanding that folks need to get. Again, before we get to writing statements, before we get to, running out with a picket sign, or, having an organizational protest around whatever, we need to really educate ourselves, because what's going to happen is your stakeholders or your stockholders are going to be asking you questions, and you need to explain beyond a feeling why this is important to you, and why this matters, and why your organization is taking this stance, and why this is, whether it be from an employee perspective or a client perspective, a customer perspective, you need to shape that, because the news media, your stakeholders, your stockholders, they're going to be in your face, and they're going to ask you questions. And the last thing you want to do is come off as performative, or come off as, I'm doing this because everybody else is doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so taking the time to really absorb yourself and understand what's going on, what's happening, what this means for you as an organization, what this means for you as an individual. Because while the organization is diving in, the individual is diving in too.
Yeah,
and so what does this mean for me? I've been in many rooms where people are like, oh, so I was taught to be colorblind. That's not right. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked that question.
Yes.
And so, and helping folks kind of process that, because, we hold tight to what our parents taught us. And most times parents weren't trying to be wrong, or they weren't trying to be not, they weren't trying to raise racists or anything like that. They were just like, we're all in this world, and we're trying to, and so you should be colorblind. They were just trying to teach their kids how to navigate in the world. And now that they're adults and they realize that if you don't see color, you don't see me.
That's right.
That's a different message for them. And so you're talking to a 40, 50-year-old, they've lived their entire life thinking that I'll just be colorblind. And now they're being told that that's not right. That's a transformative conversation. and it's one that needs to happen. But at the same time, you need to understand that before you go sharing it with others, before you speak up as an organization. And so again, DEIB, I see that as raising awareness, educating folks, and really taking a deep dive, looking at your processes and seeing how you can infiltrate those processes with this new lens that you now have, this new equity lens that you have. Social justice is the advocacy piece. And now we're talking about being anti-racist and standing up and looking for reformative ways that we can represent ourselves as an organization.
Yeah. And I have to lift up at this moment in the conversation to just say that it's not an easy feat, like for organizations who decide to go on this journey, like the transformation and the change that happens in the organization. But what first must happen in each one of us as individuals is, it's mind blowing for me sometimes, and not mind blowing in a negative way, but it just brings so much to the depth and breadth of just how much what we're taught just creates our reality. What we're exposed to creates our reality. And so to undo that, a lot of my work, of course, in the DEIB space is I spend probably 50% of my time also coaching, right? The individual, the C-suite, because you're leading through this change and you're changing at the same time. And so I resonate with everything that you just shared, because it is no easy feat for organizations who choose to go on a journey.
Absolutely. And you have to practice. Like you don't just sit in a workshop and all of a sudden, boom, you're open to broad ideas and perspectives, you have to practice. You'll sit in meetings and your mind will revert back to your old thinking. And you have to go, you know what? I need to be thinking about this different. I need to listen closely. I need to broaden my perspective. And you'll have to tell yourself time and time again that practice is really important.
Yeah, yeah. And we all do, if we're all serious about the fullness of the work of DEI, right? Like there are certain things that I have to do that on, not black, 'cause I'm black, but there are other things that I certainly have to I have to remind myself and put into practice as well. So very good. One of the things I wanted to talk about also was, you mentioned it earlier, employee resource groups. So organizations are creating these employee resource groups, but sometimes organizations really struggle to get employees to fully engage. And so a lot of the audience here probably are employees, and they may work for companies who have employee resource groups, but they may not fully understand why it's important, if it's important to them, and what the benefit of engaging in employee resource groups really brings for them and for the organization. So can you talk a little bit about employee resource groups?
Sure. So ERGs, employee resource groups, are groups of folks who come together around likeness. They're not always centered on race. I've heard of ERGs with made up of folks who work at the same organization who are in the sandwich generation. They're raising kids, but they're also taking care of elderly parents. And those folks come together and share and advise the organization. That's the main thing, employee resource groups. They advise the organization about policy, about any practices that they have that may be detrimental to that particular group, depending on what it is. Sometimes it's women, sometimes they're centered on race. So you'll have an Asian group, an African American group, so on and so forth. You mentioned lack of participation. One of the main rules that I follow around employee resource groups is that they have to be employee implemented and employee led. And so it's not the chief diversity officer or the HR director sitting down and going, okay, we're going to have these 6 ERGs. And then it's like, and then I'll build it and then they'll come. Doesn't quite work that way. One of the things that I implement with the organizations that I work with is that if you're going to do ERGs, then let's create what that's going to look like. What's the process? So we create an application. And on that application, it outlines your rules. You've got to have at least 5 people who want to start this ERG. Who's going to lead the ERG? Who's going to be the president, the inaugural president? How often will you meet, or how often do you plan to meet? Because that may change when folks join the ERG. Types of programming are you thinking about doing for the ERG? The other thing that's important, in addition to them being employee led and that they are really used to help the employer, is that they're used to create a sense of belonging. And so as you join an organization, in particular large organizations, when you join large organizations, sometimes it's hard for you to find your people. And so when you have an ERG, then if I'm an Asian American, then I'm able to join that ERG and I sort of find and create that sense of community with that particular group. Same thing for African Americans, same thing for any other group, women, etc. As you think about it, these folks are coming together. They, again, doesn't necessarily have to be around race or gender, but as they come together, they're also sharing resources with one another. Oh my gosh, I just moved here and I don't have a hairstylist. That's really important to people in the African American community. Like, I need to know where I can get my hair done. So, or I need to find a barber. I need to find a barber that's going to cut my hair right and not, I don't want to go through a whole bunch of trial and error. And so there, and thinking about other employee resource groups like folks in the sandwich generation, I'm looking for a daycare center for my mom. I'm looking for someone to sit with my dad during the day. I need someone who's going to be able to be a caregiver to greet my kids in the afternoon when they get off the bus. also take care of my elderly mother. Like there are certain needs there, and when you create that community, then that community begins to support one another. And then when they support one another, guess what happens? They're productive at work, because
Yes.
now I'm not thinking about, oh my gosh, who's going to pick up my kids, or who's going to
Yeah.
take my this doctor's appointment, or who's gonna do this, or I really need to get my hair done, and I can't find anybody. I'm not thinking about those things. I'm focused on work.
Yep.
And when I'm focused on work, I'm productive, I'm innovative, and and furthermore, particularly if you have these ERGs, I feel valued because you have helped me in a very succinct way. The organization has helped me find my community within the organization. Now, and I'll just add, that's not to say most ERGs are set up and they're open to everyone. And so whether it's a women ERG, professional women, or an African American ERG, or a sandwich generation ERG, folks may want to join in. And maybe I'm not in the sandwich generation, but I want to join because in the next 3 years I'm getting there. So I'm going to join now so I can hear about what's going on, or I want to get the information and take it back to my church or my community. And so they're open to everyone. They're not closed groups, but it gives folks an opportunity to sort of create that sense of community, which increases belonging and then increases productivity and innovation as well.
That was a really important point too, that they are open groups, and that all are welcome. That was really important.
Yes.
So why should, in your opinion, should employees, so if you're talking to employees who are kind of, I know that is a point of identification for me, right, as a woman, but I don't really know if I should get engaged with this group. What are some of the benefits to employees for engaging in ERGs?
Well, it gives you an opportunity, one, to look at policy and practice. Sometimes ERGs form and then all of a sudden it bubbles up. Well, our maternity leave policy doesn't really benefit me in the role that I'm in. Oh, well, why not? Well, because of the role that I'm in, it does this, this, and this, and then I don't get the time, or it doesn't apply to me as equally as it does to someone who may be in a higher role. And so we have these things in place, but we don't know unless someone speaks up. Right. And sometimes when you're in those spaces, you have an opportunity to learn, and then you have an opportunity to speak up. And so that's one point. Another thing that benefit that the ERGs really provide is it gives folks an opportunity to connect with other folks. And so you may not attend every meeting, you may not be a leader in that ERG, but it gives you an opportunity to connect with other folks. There are some organizations that are so large that folks rarely see each other. And so these types of groups give folks a chance to come together and just sort of understand one another. And you leave with something that you may not have necessarily went into the group for, but you leave with an additional benefit. The other thing it helps you do is it builds community around mentorship and coaching. And so oftentimes, our identities sort of put us all on the same level or on the same playing field. And so we may be a group of African Americans, or we may be a group of Asian Americans, or individuals with disabilities. But I'm a manager, you're a senior manager, and then we have an admin coordinator that's in the group as well. And so it kind of levels that playing field. And now that I've met this person that's an admin coordinator as a manager, maybe there's opportunity for me to mentor that person. And that person gets to know me, and they may say, well, can you coach me, or can you mentor me? I'd love to, advance in the organization. And so I love your mentorship around that. And so it really opens doors that may not have necessarily been open. There are times when organizations have meetings or staff meetings where everybody comes together, but usually you're in a room, a few people give reports, and you're usually like the leadership or whatever. You may celebrate a few people who did something that was rock starish, and then it's done. But you really don't get a chance to talk to one another. and you really don't get a chance to connect and engage with one another. And the ERGs give you an opportunity to do that sort of outside of the normal boundaries of work. It's
I
during work, but outside of normal boundaries.
Yeah, I like to all of that.
Mhm.
The big thing is exposure and
Yes.
affect change, right?
Uh-huh.
Like we're in these organizations, and really engaging in these employee resource groups really does give us a good way, a structured way to affect change in policy, change in procedure, even the development
Yeah.
of a new program that
Right.
was not
Right.
thought of before. So when you talk about trying to change from a DEI perspective, we talk about systems change, right? From a get
Mhm.
under the
Yes.
system. And so you're in a I always tell people, like, you're in a very powerful seat to serve on an ERG, because that's the kind of stuff you get to do. And then the exposure to peers and others, but also some higher executives in the company that you might not get an
Absolutely.
opportunity to be
Right.
exposed to. So if you're thinking about career and growth, and like, exposure is a part of that. So thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that.
Mhm.
That
For
was so
sure.
good. So good. So I want to just pause just for a moment to invite and remind you guys to please post any questions that you may have. We're going to keep talking, but we have, an expert in this field. So if there is anything as a leader that you want to ask her around DE&I, as an employee, and you're just curious, like, drop it in the chat and we will certainly address it here.
For
I
sure.
wanted to talk about accountability.
Mhm.
So you mentioned earlier about the statements, and we know over the last, I don't know, what, 24 months or so, boy,
Yeah.
statements was coming out like, right, like candy, about what organizations were going to, right, committed to be doing,
Yeah. Mhm.
especially on behalf of the Black community,
Sure.
after the rampant murders starting, we can name them all, right?
Right.
And but what are your thoughts or recommendations? Because some of these organizations have made some pretty big commitments or statements, particularly to the Black community, about what they're going to do. How can communities hold organizations accountable for some of these pledges? What are your thoughts, and what would you recommend?
Well, I think we have to ask the question. If no one asks, what have you done or what are you planning to do? Then the statement just sits there and no one's held accountable. And so whether that's through organizing, or it's, an email that you send to the organization on behalf of another organization, or you start an email campaign where you have a whole group of people who are sending messages and asking questions. I think it's important for us to ask the question.
Yeah.
If we
Yeah.
don't ask the question, then it doesn't get answered. It doesn't
Yeah.
get answered.
Yeah. I always think about, sometimes organizations could get lost in the sauce of everything that they're trying to do. And your question asking, as you just called it, is the thing that
Mhm.
slows everyone down and gets you pointed back to what you said was important to you. And so it's not always about a threat. It is curiosity. It's
Yeah,
accountability. It's the thing.
right.
Accountability is what organizations operate under, right? Like, we say we're going to do something, we do it, and we measure it, and we report out on it, and then the cycle
Mhm.
continues. So all we're
Right,
talking about here is doing more of what businesses do every day, which is to
right.
ask the question, to keep everybody accountable. I love that.
And what I recommend, Kenya, to my clients is, okay, if you're going to do this, if you're going to make this statement, make sure it's a part of what you're already doing.
Mhm,
And so,
mhm,
from the standpoint of, um, as we talk about procurement and
mhm.
thinking about contractors and vendors, what's your process for that? How are you going to adjust your process to ensure that minority contractors and vendors understand what you're needing, and that they know that you have a need and they're able to apply for bid? And then how are you working it into what you're doing? How are you then going to hold yourselves accountable? Is there a certain percentage as an organization that you want to make sure that you're engaging minority contractors and vendors? Like if you're going to make a statement, how are your processes that you're already doing going to shift slightly in order to engage the statement that you're making?
Yeah.
And so we're not putting something out there that looks really good and sounds really good, but has no teeth.
We could talk about this all night. I was thinking when you were, because I always talk to my clients too, like, hey, what's your swim lane? What are you already doing? Right. But the other thing is like, so I do these imagination activities, like let's imagine, right? In this creative space. And so if I were to imagine a world, Kenya, me, a world where companies are really accountable to really moving forward with the equity-centered leadership and creating environments of inclusivity and belonging, like it would be tied to compensation of senior executives. And it would be and it would be important enough to report out on your annual report, right? Like those are the two things. And I do have those conversations with my clients. Like if you're talking to your stakeholders or your consumers through this annual report, and you're not talking about what you're doing with diversity, equity, and inclusion, here's what we said we were going to do, here's what we did, here's how here's how it moves the business forward, then you're missing the boat. And then if you're not putting your money where your mouth is, because when you get to a certain level in an organization, we know that compensation kind of drives everything. It's like tied to the compensation. Like that's the ideal world for me when it comes to built-in systemic accountability for organizations.
And so when we build out those compensation strategies and when we're thinking about these annual reports, DE&I is not an appendage. It's not a, hey, we did all of these things and here's what we did for DE&I. It's we did these things and here's how we did it, and you incorporate it into what you do every day. Just like you incorporate your budget, just like you incorporate your human resource strategy, just like you incorporate your operational needs, you incorporate DE&I as well. And it's a part of what you do. And when it becomes a part of what you do, then it's a part of what you do. It's not an extra thing that folks are, oh, by the way, we have to do this.
Let's not forget. Absolutely. And I think that's where Chief Diversity Officer roles, right? I was reading a report, and it was talking about the fastest growing C-level role. And of course, the Chief Diversity Officer was, I think, has become the fastest in like the last 2 years, but it was up there with Chief Revenue Officer, Chief Growth Officer. And so what exactly is a Chief Diversity Officer, and what does a Chief Diversity Officer do?
Sure. So CDOs, Chief Diversity Officers, are individuals who are focused and centered on DE&I, DEIA, DEIB, IDEIA, however whatever acronym your organization uses. They're centered on that. And so they spend a lot of time ensuring that it's incorporated into what the organization is doing. And so they are absolutely a C-suite individual. They're at the table when these larger discussions are happening. And that's their opportunity to sort of insert DE&I as these conversations are going on. And so the goal of that role is that they're not always having to insert. Other folks start doing it for them and because it's become ingrained and they know, they understand it. So that individual, in addition to having voice at the top level of the organization, that individual also, coordinates training, looks out for programming for the organization, really focuses in on that education and awareness to make sure that it's happening in all pockets of the organization. And so and that's just one piece. In addition to that, we're looking at the organizational practices and policies and ensuring that equity lens exists in all of those areas, while also paying attention to vendors and contractors and who they're working with, and ensuring that folks have an opportunity. They're also usually the face of the organization in various spaces when it comes to DEIB. And so that's a really big job. And that person spends a lot of time doing it. I will tell you that person needs a lot of support. And so having a manager, having an admin coordinator, and folks who know how to coordinate schedules and build out PowerPoints and make sure that they're in the right place, because it can get really hectic, especially based on the number of divisions or VP areas that an organization has. They all may have different needs. When someone's a VP of finance, but if we're talking a plant and someone's also managing the workers on the floor, those needs are going to be slightly different because we're moving from professional to blue collar. And so how are we representing the information that we're sharing? How are we engaging with these folks? How are we hearing from them? There's also a component of this around hearing complaints and understanding position of where folks are, and sharing in some of those experiences. And that's where HR becomes a really good partner with the person that's in the CDO role, because those employee relations issues may bubble up, and they may show up in the CDO's office to say, I feel like I've been discriminated against, or I feel like someone's being very misogynistic, or what have you. And so making space and time to share with employees is really important as well. And so the person who is in the CDO role, they are in a pretty hefty role that's at the C-suite level, but they have to, and they need to drill all the way down to the bottom levels of the organization, and really dealing with those individual supporters that are in organizations to understand their role and what's going on with them, so that they can continue to provide resources and ensure that they're in an equitable space as well.
Yeah, and I've even run into some peers in the, practice who are in CDO roles that, a lot of them even have to report to the board, right? So if they are working, they have to get in front of the board of directors as well.
For sure. Every structure is different, but there's a lot of accountability in that role.
Yeah. And the reason I kind of wanted to pivot to it too is because, one, it's one of the fastest, or if not the fastest growing C-suite position. But when you think about career opportunity and career growth, right, this has really opened the door for new career opportunities for people that it wasn't there. And so talk a little bit to us about, so if someone is interested, I'm sure this happens to you too, but people will reach out to me on LinkedIn, on wherever they can find me.
Right.
And they want to know, how do they get into either the work, or if they're working inside of an organization, they really want to know, like, what do I need to do to get into that C-suite or that CDO role? So can you talk a little bit about what the journey looks like, your recommendations?
I get that question all the time. How did you start doing this? How do I start doing this? What's the path? And my answer and my response is always, everybody's path is different. Everybody's path is different. You have to be an individual who cares about the work, who has patience to do the work, because you hear some things, and it's not because someone's trying to be mean or trying to be disrespectful. They're just ignorant. They don't know. And so you have to be someone that has the patience to work through with someone who just doesn't know. And they may say terms or use different phrases that are offensive, but it's what they know. And so your role in that, from a coaching perspective, is to help them figure it out. And so I often talk about the skills that are necessary, not so much the journey, because everybody's path is different. I grew into this from being an HR practitioner, and I really caught on to doing work in the DE&I space. And so that's an area where I wanted to grow, and I began to direct my career path towards it. Others may come into it from a corporate perspective, or they may have been in another role, and this is an area where they find space and place, and so they grow into it from that perspective. And so there really isn't like a step-by-step path. Like
Yeah.
if you're going to become a CPA, you get an accounting degree, and then you do this, and then you do that, and then you take the CPA exam, and then you're a CPA. And like there, but for a chief diversity officer, I really focus in on the soft skills, which is patience, educating yourself
Yeah.
about, really delineating, like you said, from social justice and DEIB work, and how those two things can come together. Really paying attention to what's happening around the world and keeping abreast on what's happening in the media. Understanding and recognizing which companies, firms, or organizations you really want to work with or for.
Mm-hmm.
Really knowing yourself and knowing who's the right person for you to kind of help groom or support. There's so much, around the soft skill space that really needs to happen. And so, from an educational standpoint, of course you want to, I've run into folks who have sociology degrees. I've run into folks who have business
Yeah.
degrees, folks who have psychology degrees. And so there's not any one particular area. It's really honing in your passion and really making sure that you have the demeanor and the presence in order to, and the knowledge, because that's
Mm-hmm.
important too, in order to facilitate and really lead in this space.
Yeah. I will add self-awareness and emotional intelligence
Yes,
is
for
a
sure.
must to have if you are going to journey in this space, because you're carrying a lot, you are absorbing a lot, and you're
Mm-hmm.
responsible for a lot, right?
Right.
You're responsible for creating an environment of belonging and an inclusivity for
Mm-hmm.
all people, right?
Right.
For all people. And then
For sure.
so that's the other thing, is that you have to realize that you're in this, like I've literally had people that want to get into it, and then after further conversation, it's really important. I'm like, you do know that you have to be there for all people, right?
Right.
You cannot
Everybody. You're not just
everybody.
working with the Black people.
You can't just
You're
work with
not
the
just
Black
working with
people.
the women.
Nope. It's
You're not just
everybody.
working
So
with individuals with disability. It's
yeah,
everybody.
everybody, which is a daunting task, and I think it's so important.
Right.
It's just important to call out. So yeah, that self-awareness, that emotional intelligence, and that knowing that like you're walking into creating an environment, a sense of belonging for everyone.
Right.
And you do wear multiple hats, right? Sometimes you're a
Mm-hmm.
coach, sometimes you're a teacher, sometimes you're a
Uh-huh.
listener, right? And your
Right.
empathy, the empathy is the thing that
Oh my
is
gosh. The
most needed
empathy.
in that moment,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Is
Yes.
most needed in that
Yes.
moment. Uh, Even though that may not be what you want to give in that moment, but
Right.
that truly may be what it is. I love that. Are there any certifications? This is the other question that I get, and I just want to get your
Mm-hmm.
perspective for the audience. Are there any particular certifications that I need to get, and or if I'm interested?
I wouldn't necessarily say need. There are several certifications that are out there that are available. Cornell is offering something. There's a school in Florida that's offering something. There's a certification institute that does
Mm-hmm.
diversity certification, and so they're available. Um, if you want to deepen your knowledge, I'm not knocking any of them. I don't have any of those certifications.
Neither do I.
But they're available. If that's something that you want to do to help deepen your knowledge, they're available. And I just, Kenya, wanted to add to what you were saying about empathy. You really need to know yourself, and really, you really need to understand and know yourself and where you sit in this space. And so I am very cognizant of who I am when I walk into a space, and I know myself, and I'm very self-aware of who I am when I walk into a space. And so if there are still things that trigger you,
Yeah.
if there are still things that you hear and you're just like, I can't believe you said that, and now you're ready to fight the powers that be, like, you need to take a break for a minute. you because you're gonna experience and hear things in this space that, again, are going to be offensive. They're going to be, but you want folks to feel comfortable enough with you to share where they are, because we have to meet folks where they are. You can't expect folks, just because of their position, their power, or whatever, to be at some level of space and place where you are. They're coming to you for information. They're coming to you to learn, and you have to meet them where they are. And if you don't have the ability to do that, go do something else.
Yeah.
So just go do something else.
That is it.
Go do something
I
else.
always ask someone, I said, well, tell me what you do. Like, tell me your response when you're in your most stressed out self, right? When someone says something that like pisses you off, or someone says something like, what do you do? Where do you go to find solace? Where do you go to get regrounded? How do you get yourself out of that situation as fast as possible? If you don't have a way of doing, if you don't have a process to move through things in that manner quickly enough,
right?
I believe two things. You're going to burn out really fast in this work, for one, which is not healthy for you. And then you're not going to be able to be as effective and affect change as you would want to and as you should in this role, because you're not going to be able to reach people because you're blocked. So I always recommend, like, work through and have a process for knowing your I know my triggers. I am acutely aware of my triggers, and I definitely, I have them, and I haven't worked through all of them, but I also have a process of how I regroup, pull away, how I exit conversations, how I come back, and I've even started to know how to breathe in the moment. And I think that's you cannot underscore that enough if you are thinking about how I get into this space.
Yes, absolutely. And folks need to be very careful of becoming they overcorrecting. And now you're the social justice collector. And so whatever it is that's important to you, if it's women's rights, if it's African American issues, if it's whatever it is, you see it everywhere. And it's just you see it everywhere, and everywhere you see it, you got to fight it. And that's not always the case. And so if you find yourself in that space where you're overcorrecting, it may be time for you to figure out how to take a chill pill and go, okay, let me sharpen my lens and make sure that I'm seeing what I'm seeing. Because just look, he dropped that potato chip on the floor. He's a racist like that. No. He didn't drop it there so that the janitor could come pick it up. He didn't even know he dropped it.
He didn't even know he dropped it. Calm down, right?
Right. Yeah, just simmer down. And so we overcorrect. We overcorrect, and we have to be very mindful of that.
That's so good. I always enjoy time with you anyway.
Absolutely.
But I have enjoyed because we've been on panels together and done things with other people, but like this is our first time, just you and I, really talking about what we're both passionate about, which is leadership and culture. That's what I always tell people, like, hey, stop overcomplicating this thing. This thing is about leadership and culture. And moving your business forward. And so I have certainly enjoyed having you. Thank you so much for being here and helping us celebrate Low Country Juneteenth week. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Congratulations to Low Country Juneteenth week, period. Like, this is my last intimate conversations as a part of this.
I get to be your finale.
Yes, you are the finale. Yes, but thank you. Thank you to everybody for joining. And Dr. Edwards, I just want to give you the last couple of seconds to say anything you want to say before we part.
So in parting, I will say to the folks out there that there is opportunity to do something. It doesn't have to be something big. It doesn't have to be something on a large scale. But as you think about your space and place within an organization, you have voice. And you should use your voice to speak out on behalf of yourself for others. And so whether it's a small thing or a program or an activity within your organization, it's something. And so you have to start somewhere. And so don't despise small beginnings. Start somewhere.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for joining us, and we will talk to you soon. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night.